The ICU was too quiet for something so final. Machines breathed in slow mechanical rhythm. A ventilator pushed oxygen into lungs that no longer commanded it. Monitors pulsed green across black screens, indifferent, precise, loyal only to numbers. Outside the glass wall, the hospital moved as it always did, carts rolling, pagers chirping, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Life continuing. Inside the room, time had stopped 6 months ago. Admiral Thomas Hale stood at the bedside of his daughter. He wore full dress whites, not because it was required, because it was armor. His posture was rigid, hands clasped behind his back, shoulders squared like he was standing inspection on a destroyer deck. Only his eyes betrayed him, hollowed by exhaustion, sharpened by grief that had calcified into something dangerous. His daughter, Lily Hale, lay motionless beneath the hospital blanket. 23 years old, former college swimmer, sharp-minded, stubborn, fiercely independent. 6 months earlier, a car accident had left her unresponsive. 3 neurologists, 2 confirmatory exams, a declaration of brain death. The ventilator had kept her heart beating. The hospital had kept the paperwork ready. She's been brain dead for 6 months, Admiral. Dr. Victor Ramsey, chief of neurology, spoke in a tone perfected over decades of delivering finality. There is no recovery. We have repeated every clinical test. The EEG is flat. The brainstem reflexes are absent. There is no cortical activity. His voice was not cruel. It was procedural. It's time to let her go. The words settled into the room like dust. The Admiral did not respond. He stared at his daughter's face as though memorizing it for burial. If you don't sign the authorization today, Doctor, Ramsey continued carefully, the hospital is legally obligated to proceed under end-of-life policy. There it was, the pressure. Behind Ramsey stood a hospital administrator holding a slim folder. Legal clearance forms, ethics committee documentation. Signatures already printed. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and something metallic, like fear disguised as sterility. Near the back wall, nearly invisible, stood Nurse Emma Navarro, assigned to the case 2 weeks earlier. Officially, she was there to provide family support. Unofficially, she had been placed there because no one wanted to waste senior staff time on a case already closed. She looked young, too young, slim build, hair pulled back tightly, pale blue scrubs, no visible jewelry, no makeup beyond what long shifts erased. Her badge still carried the small orange stripe that marked her as new. Rookie. Probationary? The kind of nurse administrators felt comfortable overruling. She had said nothing during the meeting. She had not looked at the doctor. She had been looking at the monitor. There were things monitors did that people ignored. Microfluctuations, subtle waveform inconsistencies, rhythmic variances that didn't match a purely mechanical state. Most dismissed them as machine artifact. She did not. Dr. Ramsey slid the clipboard toward the Admiral. Sir, the Admiral stared at the paper. His hand did not move. He had led extraction teams under fire. He had ordered men into impossible terrain. He had signed casualty reports. But this pen felt heavier than any weapon he had carried. Behind him, the ventilator exhaled softly. Emma stepped forward, one quiet step. Sir, she said gently. Her voice was calm, measured, not pleading. May I check something? One last time. Dr. Ramsey turned sharply. Nurse, don't give him false hope. The dismissal was automatic, protective, possessive. Emma did not argue. She did not look at the doctor. She looked at the father. The Admiral turned his head slightly. For the first time, someone in the room was not speaking at him, but to him. What is it? He asked. Just something I'd like to confirm. Ramsey exhaled sharply. We've confirmed everything. Emma stepped closer to the bed. She moved carefully around the IV lines and ventilator tubing. She leaned down near Lily's head. 2 fingers slid behind the ear, precise placement at the base of the skull. Her touch was deliberate, Not exploratory, not random. She applied firm pressure. The cardiac monitor flickered. A small spike, so small it could be ignored. Ramsey crossed his arms. Electrical artifact. Emma pressed again. Same location, same pressure. The spike returned. Clean. Repeatable. The Admiral leaned closer, his eyes locked on the screen. Ramsey stepped forward, irritated now. Machines react to movement. Emma pressed a third time. The spike appeared again. Identical. The neurologist frowned. Coincidence happened once, not 3 times. Emma lifted her eyes slowly to the Admiral. "Sir," she said quietly, "I recommend calling neurology for a repeat brainstem assessment." Ramsey's tone sharpened. "That is completely unnecessary." The Admiral did not take his eyes off the monitor. "What did you just do?" he asked her. Emma hesitated only half a second. "A cranial nerve stimulation point." Ramsey scoffed. "This is a hospital, not a battlefield." Emma did not react, but something in the air shifted. The Admiral straightened slightly. "Call neurology," he said. Ramsey hesitated. The administrator shifted uncomfortably. Protocol had been disrupted. Authority had been challenged. Emma stepped back into position by the wall, hands folded again. Silent, invisible. But something had changed. 10 minutes later, the neurologist arrived. Dr. Sarah Klein. Efficient, analytical, not easily impressed. She did not waste time with greetings. "What are we repeating?" Ramsey spoke first. "Nothing substantial," a nurse observed artifact. Klein turned to Emma. "Show me." Emma approached again. Same placement, same pressure. The spike returned. Klein's eyes narrowed. Again. It repeated. Klein leaned closer to the monitor. Her expression shifted. "Prep for full reassessment," she said. Ramsey's jaw tightened. "We've done this." "Then it should be easy to confirm again," Klein replied coolly. The Admiral remained still, but his eyes were no longer hollow. They were alert, hunting, searching. The exam began. Pupil response. Minimal, corneal reflex. Subtle, gag reflex. Pause. Repeat that, Klein murmured. The room held its breath. Something flickered. Not dramatic, not cinematic, but present. The ventilator alarm chirped briefly as Lily's heart rate climbed. Ramsey stiffened. "That's autonomic." Then Lily's eyelids fluttered. "Once." Ramsey's voice rose. "Reflex." Emma leaned closer. "Lily," she said softly, "if you can hear me, squeeze once." The room went still. Nothing. Ramsey exhaled through his nose. Then Lily's fingers curled. Weak. Intentional. The Admiral inhaled sharply like he'd been underwater for 6 months. Klein froze. "That was command-based," she whispered. Ramsey stepped backward. "That's impossible." But it had happened. An impossibility had just cracked open. Emma stepped back again. Silent. Calm. Invisible. But the room no longer belonged to the doctors. It belonged to the truth. The squeeze lasted less than a second. But in that second, 6 months of certainty shattered. The ventilator continued its mechanical rhythm, indifferent to the seismic shift in the room. The monitors still hummed. The fluorescent lights still cast their clinical glow, yet everything felt altered, like gravity itself had shifted direction. Admiral Hale did not breathe. His eyes were locked on his daughter's hand wrapped weakly around Emma's fingers. Dr. Klein was the first to recover. "Repeat command," she said, voice steady but urgent. Emma leaned close again. Her posture was controlled. No triumph, no panic. "Lily," she whispered gently, "if you can hear me, squeeze twice." The ICU felt like a sealed chamber. 1 second, 2, then a faint tightening, release, and then again. 2 squeezes. Deliberate. Measured. The Admiral staggered backward, catching himself on the side rail. Ramsey's voice came out strained. This is not possible. Spinal reflex arcs can mimic. Dr. Klein cut him off sharply. That was a response to a complex verbal command. Her eyes didn't leave the patient. She is not brain dead. The administrator near the door stiffened. The legal folder in her hands lowered slowly. Ramsey's face had gone pale. You're overreacting, he insisted. Residual brainstem activity does not equal awareness. Klein stood upright now. It equals misdiagnosis. The word hit the air like a dropped scalpel. Misdiagnosis. 6 months. A declared death. The Admiral's voice was quiet. Explain, he said. Klein inhaled slowly. Brain death requires complete and irreversible cessation of brain and brainstem function. What we're seeing contradicts that. Ramsey shook his head. EEGs were flat. Reflex testing was absent. Apnea testing was conclusive. Then we repeat everything, Klein replied firmly. The administrator stepped forward. Doctor, before we proceed, we need to consider hospital protocol and liability exposure. His calm was more frightening than anger. My daughter just responded to a command, he said. No one in this room will use the word liability again. Silence followed. Klein began issuing orders. Prep for full EEG. I want repeat apnea testing under controlled supervision. Check sedation logs. Pull all prior imaging. The nurses moved quickly now. Even the ones who had whispered sympathy for the grieving admiral just hours earlier. Emma stepped back toward the wall. Invisible again. Watching. Always watching. Ramsey approached her quietly near the medication cart. You've created chaos, he muttered under his breath. Emma met his gaze calmly. I applied pressure to a nerve, she said evenly. You had no authority. I had observation. He leaned closer. If this turns out to be artifact, you've tortured that man. Emma's eyes didn't waver. If it isn't artifact, she replied softly, you've been burying his daughter alive. Ramsey stepped back as if struck. Across the room, Lily's heart rate climbed slightly again as technicians began adjusting equipment. The ventilator settings were modified. Klein supervised personally. Baseline first, she ordered. No interference. The EEG machine began tracing. Green lines scrolled across the monitor. Not flat, subtle activity, not robust, but undeniably present. Ramsey swallowed. That's background noise. Klein didn't look at him. No, that's cortical fluctuation. The Admiral moved closer to the screen. He did not understand the medical terminology, but he understood motion, and those lines were moving. For 6 months, he had been told there was nothing. Now there was something. The administrator slipped quietly into the hallway, already dialing her phone. Within 15 minutes, 2 additional suits appeared near the ICU entrance. Risk management, legal counsel. They spoke in hushed tones, eyes darting toward the room, calculating exposure. Emma noticed everything. She always did. The repeat brainstem exam continued. Pupillary response showed minimal reactivity. Corneal reflex, faint but present. Gag reflex, delayed. Klein's face tightened. This is not consistent with brain death. Ramsey's voice rose defensively. Delayed reflexes do not equal recovery. No, Klein agreed. They equal error. The word hung again. Error. The Admiral turned to Ramsey slowly. For 6 months, he said quietly, you told me she was gone. Closed it. I relied on documented tests, he said finally. Klein turned sharply. Let's see those documents. The administrator stepped back into the room. Doctor, we need to pause. This is escalating beyond clinical scope. Klein's stare was surgical. A patient showing awareness is never beyond clinical scope. The administrator hesitated. We may need to transfer her to another facility. The Admiral's jaw tightened. You will not move her. His tone left no room for debate. Emma stepped closer to the bedside again as Lily's fingers twitched. Not a reflex. Searching. She leaned in gently. You're doing well, she whispered. Stay with us. Lily's heart rate steadied. The neurologist observed closely. She's tracking voice stimulus, Klein murmured. Ramsey shook his head again almost desperately. This is late neural discharge, nothing more. Emma glanced at the EEG. The activity wasn't chaotic, it was responsive. That distinction mattered. Klein straightened. I want the original brain death packet. The administrator hesitated again. It's already in records. Then retrieve it, Klein said sharply. Minutes later, the folder arrived. Ramsey stood rigid. Klein flipped through the pages. Apnea test documentation, reflex charts, EEG printouts, signatures. Her brow furrowed. She flipped back. Timestamp discrepancy, she murmured. Ramsey stiffened. What? The sedation log indicates medication administered prior to the second reflex exam. That's standard protocol, not for confirmatory brain death testing. Silence. The administrator shifted. That could be a clerical error. The second attending physician listed wasn't on shift that day. Ramsey's face drained. That's impossible. Emma felt the room grow colder. This was no longer about error. This was about paperwork. Intentional or negligent. Either way, catastrophic. The Admiral took one step forward. Are you telling me, he said evenly, that the documentation declaring my daughter dead may be inaccurate? Klein met his eyes. I'm telling you it requires investigation. Ramsey stepped backward. This is spiraling out of control. No, Klein replied calmly. It's coming under control. Lily's eyelids fluttered again, this time longer. Her pupils shifted, tracking Emma's movement as she leaned slightly to the left. Klein inhaled sharply. She's following visual stimulus. Ramsey's composure cracked. That is not possible. The Admiral's voice dropped into something dangerous. Then explain it. Ramsey had no answer. Outside the ICU, more staff had gathered discreetly. Word spreads quickly in hospitals, especially when the impossible happens. Inside, Emma maintained her stillness. She did not claim credit. She did not speak about techniques. She simply observed, because this was not the first time she had seen someone labeled gone when they were not. And she knew what came next. Institutions protect themselves. The administrator stepped forward again. We need to contain this. No external communication until internal review. The Admiral reached into his uniform pocket. Slowly, he removed his phone. Dialed one number. He did not raise his voice. This is Admiral Hale, he said into the receiver. I need the base commander and NCIS at St. Matthew's Medical Center. Immediately. He ended the call. The room fell silent. Ramsey stared at him. That's unnecessary. The Admiral looked directly at him. So was declaring my daughter dead. Emma felt Lily's fingers curl weakly around her hand again. Another squeeze. Fragile, but intentional. She leaned close. You're safe, she whispered, and for the first time in 6 months, Lily's breathing changed. Not ventilator-driven. Initiated. Small. But real. Klein's eyes widened. She's initiating breath. Ramsey stepped back again, nearly colliding with the administrator. The foundation beneath him was collapsing. The machines continued their rhythm, but now they weren't sustaining death. They were witnessing awakening. And somewhere in the hallway, sirens could already be heard in the distance. Authority was coming, and the hospital, for the first time, looked afraid. The first thing everyone heard was the silence. Hospitals are never truly quiet, not even at night. There are always carts rolling, monitors chiming, overhead pages cutting through the air. But when uniformed authority enters a building, something shifts. Conversations thin out. Footsteps slow. Eyes follow. By the time the base commander and 2 NCIS agents stepped off the elevator and into the ICU corridor, word had already spread that something had gone wrong in room 312. Very wrong. The agents did not rush. They did not posture. Their calm was precise, the kind that comes from knowing they don't need to explain themselves. The base commander, Captain Aaron Cole, spotted Admiral Hale through the glass. He didn't knock. He entered. The administrator tried to intercept him. Sir, this is a sensitive medical situation. Cole didn't even glance at her. So is falsifying a death declaration, he said evenly. Inside the room, Admiral Hale stood beside the bed. He had not moved from Lily's side. He hadn't blinked much either. Captain Cole stepped in close. Tom, he said quietly. The Admiral gave a small nod. No salute, no formalities, just understanding, she responded. Hale said. Cole looked at the monitors, then at Dr. Klein. Explain. Klein did not hesitate. She demonstrates cortical activity, brainstem reflex, and command response. The prior brain death documentation appears compromised. The word hung. Compromised. Ramsey flinched. The NCIS agents moved toward the nurse's station immediately. Freeze all electronic chart access, one ordered calmly. The charge nurse hesitated. The agent's tone did not change. Now. Keys clacked quickly. Digital records were locked. Inside the room, the administrator's composure began to fracture. This is a hospital, she said carefully. We have procedures. Admiral Hale turned toward her slowly. You declared my daughter legally dead. The room felt smaller. If this was error, he continued, we will correct it. If this was negligence, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Emma remained near the head of the bed, still, steady, watching Lily's respirations. There it was again. A slight, independent inhale between ventilator cycles. Small, but intentional. Klein noticed it too. She's initiating breath more consistently. Ramsey rubbed a hand over his face. This doesn't reverse 6 months of diagnostics. No, Klein replied, but it demands we question them. The first NCIS agent entered the room holding a tablet. Dr. Ramsey, he said evenly, we need to review all signatories on the brain death confirmation. Ramsey's jaw tightened. Is this necessary? Yes. The word was final. The agent tapped the screen. Second confirmatory exam lists Dr. Michael Lang as attending. Ramsey nodded stiffly. Correct. The agent's eyes did not leave the screen. Dr. Lang was in Denver that day. Silence detonated. The administrator inhaled sharply. That must be a clerical entry issue. The agent looked up slowly. It carries his digital signature. Ramsey's composure cracked just slightly. That's impossible. The second agent stepped forward. Digital signatures are traceable. The administrator's voice turned urgent. We need internal review before federal escalation. Captain Cole's gaze shifted toward her. You declared the daughter of a Navy admiral dead. He paused. You don't get internal. The weight of the moment pressed against the walls. Emma glanced at Lily's hand again. Another squeeze. Weak, but deliberate. She leaned close. You're not alone, she whispered. Lily's eyelids fluttered. Klein observed closely. Tracking persists. You're interpreting noise as signal. Klein turned toward him. I'm interpreting responsiveness. The first agent approached the bedside. Admiral, we'll need to interview all staff involved in initial diagnosis. Hale nodded once. No one leaves this floor. The administrator's face had gone pale. This could destroy the hospital's reputation. The Admiral's reply was cold. My daughter's life was nearly destroyed. Outside, more staff had gathered quietly at a distance. Whispers traveled fast. Brain death reversal. Military investigation. Fraud. Inside the room, tension coiled tightly. Ramsey stood rigid, cornered by evidence and authority. Emma stepped back slightly as respiratory therapy adjusted settings again. Lily's breathing pattern was shifting. Less mechanical. More organic. Klein leaned closer to observe pupil response once more. Light, she instructed. The beam passed over Lily's eyes. This time, the constriction was clearer. Unmistakable. Klein exhaled slowly. She has functional brainstem activity, Ramsey whispered under his breath. This is career ending. Emma heard him. She did not respond, because this was not about careers. The second NCIS agent approached her quietly. Your nurse, Navarro? Yes, sir. You initiated the reassessment? I observed inconsistency. The agent studied her. You have prior military medical training. A subtle pause. Emma's answer was simple. Yes? Where? Field assignment. The agent's eyes sharpened. Which unit? Emma held his gaze evenly. I'm not authorized to discuss that. The agent did not press further, but something in his posture shifted. Recognition. Respect. Across the room, Admiral Hale had heard enough. He turned slightly. Navarro, he said quietly. Emma met his eyes. Sir, you saw what others missed. I noticed what was there. He studied her carefully now. Not as a nurse, as something else. You've done this before, he said. Emma did not confirm. She did not deny. Klein approached them. We need to move her to neuro ICU under full monitoring. Transfer requires board approval. Captain Cole's voice cut cleanly through the air. Approve it. There was no room for resistance. Orders were issued. Equipment adjusted. A transport team assembled quickly. As Lily's bed began moving out of room 312, Emma walked beside the head, monitoring lines and oxygen flow. Ramsey remained behind momentarily, staring at the now empty space where certainty had once stood. His authority had fractured. The corridor outside parted as the bed rolled through. Staff watched in stunned silence. Some avoided eye contact. Others stared openly. The base commander walked beside Admiral Hale. You believe this was deliberate? Cole asked quietly. Hale's eyes stayed forward. I believe something was hidden. Behind them, the NCIS agents continued securing records, digital backups, server access, audit logs. The hospital's infrastructure was no longer untouchable. Inside the neuro ICU, lights were dimmer, quieter, focused. Lily was reconnected to monitoring systems. Respiratory support adjusted. Klein supervised every movement personally. Continue stimulation protocol, she instructed. Emma nodded. As the room settled, Admiral Hale stood again at his daughter's side. Only now his posture had changed. Not mourning, guarding. Lily's fingers twitched again. Searching, they found Emma's hand. Another squeeze, stronger this time. Hale swallowed hard. She's fighting, he whispered. But something in his posture shifted. Recognition, respect. Across the room, Admiral Hale had heard enough. He turned slightly. Navarro, he said quietly. Emma met his eyes. Sir, you saw what others missed. I noticed what was there. He studied her carefully now. Not as a nurse, as something else. You've done this before, he said. Emma did not confirm. She did not deny. Klein approached them. We need to move her to neuro ICU under full monitoring. Transfer requires board approval. Captain Cole's voice cut cleanly through the air. Approve it. There was no room for resistance. Orders were issued. Equipment adjusted. A transport team assembled quickly. As Lily's bed began moving out of room 312, Emma walked beside the head, monitoring lines and oxygen flow. Ramsey remained behind momentarily, staring at the now empty space where certainty had once stood. His authority had fractured. The corridor outside parted as the bed rolled through. Staff watched in stunned silence. Some avoided eye contact. Others stared openly. The base commander walked beside Admiral Hale. You believe this was deliberate? Cole asked quietly. Hale's eyes stayed forward. I believe something was hidden. Behind them, the NCIS agents continued securing records, digital backups, server access, audit logs. The hospital's infrastructure was no longer untouchable. Inside the neuro ICU, lights were dimmer, quieter, focused. Lily was reconnected to monitoring systems. Respiratory support adjusted. Klein supervised every movement personally. Continue stimulation protocol, she instructed. Emma nodded. As the room settled, Admiral Hale stood again at his daughter's side. Only now his posture had changed, not mourning. Guarding, Lily's fingers twitched again. Searching, they found Emma's hand. Another squeeze, stronger this time. Hale swallowed hard. She's fighting, he whispered. Emma looked at Lily's face. There was color returning to her cheeks. Subtle, but undeniable. Yes, Emma said quietly. She is. Outside the room, Captain Cole stood with the NCIS agents reviewing initial digital findings. One of the agents looked up from the tablet. The audit log shows modification to the brain death report 48 hours after it was signed. Cole's jaw tightened. By whom? The agent turned the screen. Dr. Victor Ramsey. The weight of that revelation settled like iron. Inside the neuro ICU, Lily's eyes fluttered open again. Longer this time. Her pupils moved, focused. They found her father, and for the first time in 6 months, recognition. A tear slid down the Admiral's face. He didn't wipe it away. Emma stepped back quietly, not claiming the moment, not stepping into it, just ensuring the oxygen line remained secure. Because this was never about proving anyone wrong. It was about making sure someone wasn't buried alive. And somewhere down the hall, doors were closing on a different kind of patient. Dr. Ramsey. Under investigation. The hospital conference room had been designed for board meetings and donor luncheons. Polished oak table. Neutral art. Soft recessed lighting meant to calm investors and grieving families alike. Now it felt like an interrogation chamber. Dr. Victor Ramsey sat at one end of the table. His lab coat was gone. His tie had been loosened. Across from him sat 2 NCIS agents, a legal officer from the base, and Captain Cole. A hospital attorney occupied the seat beside Ramsey, whispering occasionally, as if proximity could prevent collapse. The administrator, Helen Morris, stood near the far wall. Her hands were folded tightly in front of her, her professional composure stretched thin. On the table between them sat printed copies of Lily Hale's brain death documentation. Every page marked, every signature highlighted. Agent Rivera spoke first. Dr. Ramsey, the second confirmatory exam lists Dr. Michael Lang as attending. Yes, Dr. Lang was not present in the state that day. Ramsey exhaled slowly. Digital documentation can be entered remotely. Rivera didn't blink. Dr. Lang's login credentials were used from your terminal. Silence settled. The hospital attorney leaned forward. My client is not obligated to answer. Captain Cole interrupted calmly. He is when it involves falsifying a death certificate of a military dependent. The weight of federal jurisdiction pressed heavily into the room. Ramsey's jaw tightened. This is being exaggerated. There was no malicious intent. Agent Rivera leaned forward slightly. Then, explain the sedation entry administered prior to apnea testing. That could have been a nurse input error. Timestamp shows it was entered by you. Across the table, Helen Morris shifted. This was a high-profile case. Pressure was significant. Captain Cole's eyes moved to her. Pressure from whom? She didn't answer immediately. Ramsey looked at her. For a brief second, their silence spoke louder than any confession. Back in the neuro ICU, Lily's breathing had begun to show subtle independence between ventilator cycles. Dr. Klein observed closely. She's initiating spontaneous respirations more frequently, she murmured. Admiral Hale stood beside the bed, his hand gently wrapped around his daughter's. He did not speak much. He watched, as if afraid that any distraction would break the fragile bridge pulling her back. Emma stood near the monitor, eyes tracking every fluctuation. Lily's pupils moved again. Slower now. Focused. They lingered on her father. Recognition was no longer fleeting, it was present. Klein turned to Emma quietly. That cranial stimulation point. Where did you learn it? Emma's posture remained steady. Field medicine. What branch? Emma paused. Joint operations. You were more than a standard medic. Emma didn't respond. She adjusted Lily's oxygen line gently. Across the hallway, staff whispered. She was dead. How does that even happen? Fear moved faster than gossip, because if a hospital could declare a living patient dead, what else could be wrong? Back in the conference room, the tension was fracturing. Agent Rivera turned a page. The EEG performed 6 months ago. This scan shows electrical activity. Ramsey shook his head. That was artifact. Rivera slid forward the reanalysis conducted that morning. It was not artifact. The attorney placed a hand on Ramsey's arm. You need to stop speaking. Ramsey stared at the table. His voice lowered. We were facing resource constraints. Captain Cole's expression hardened. Explain. Ramsey swallowed. Long-term ventilator cases require bed allocation review. Helen Morris closed her eyes briefly. Ramsey continued. There was pressure to resolve non-recoverable cases. Agent Rivera leaned forward. So you resolved it? No, Ramsey snapped defensively. She met criteria at the time, with falsified confirmation. Ramsey's silence this time was louder than denial. Back in the ICU, Lily's hand tightened again. Stronger. Emma leaned closer. You're doing well, she whispered. Lily's eyes flicked toward her, focused, intentional. Dr. Klein inhaled sharply. She's visually tracking you. Admiral Hale looked at Emma slowly. There was something in his gaze now beyond gratitude. Recognition. You've seen this before, he said quietly. Emma kept her eyes on Lily. Yes, in combat. It wasn't a question. Emma nodded once. Hale studied her carefully. I've commanded rescue operations in places most people don't know exist, he said. I recognize that kind of calm. Emma did not smile. I was trained to observe, she replied simply. He held her gaze for a moment longer. You were trained for more than observation. She didn't answer. In the conference room, the hospital attorney's composure began to fray. We can settle this internally, he insisted. No need for federal charges. Captain Cole's reply was steady. You altered a legal death declaration. Agent Rivera added and suppressed contradictory data. Helen Morris spoke finally. There were conversations about bed shortages, about insurance caps, about long-term occupancy metrics. Ramsey closed his eyes. The truth was surfacing. Ugly. Institutional. We didn't intend harm, Morris whispered. Captain Cole's voice was ice. Intent does not resurrect someone you bury. Back in the ICU, Lily attempted something new. Her lips moved. No sound, but movement. Emma leaned closer. Don't push too hard, she whispered. We'll get there. Klein adjusted sedation carefully to avoid suppressing responsiveness. She may have been locked in, Klein said quietly. Admiral Hale's jaw tightened. For 6 months. Klein nodded, trapped inside her own body. The horror of it pressed heavily into the room. Emma felt Lily's fingers tighten again, almost urgently. She lowered her voice further. You're safe now. Lily's heart rate steadied. Across the hall, Captain Cole entered the ICU quietly. He approached Admiral Hale. It's worse than error, he said softly. Hale didn't look away from his daughter. I know. Ramsey altered confirmation documentation. Hale exhaled slowly. Charges? Yes. Hale nodded once. Good. Cole glanced toward Emma. That nurse. Hale followed his gaze. She's the reason we're standing here. Cole studied her carefully. She has a file. Hale's eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of file? Classified. That word lingered. Hale watched Emma as she adjusted Lily's IV line with steady hands. A rookie nurse. Leave it sealed, Hale said quietly. Cole nodded. Inside the room, Lily's eyelids opened again. Wider. Her gaze shifted deliberately toward her father, and this time she held it. Recognition, awareness, alive. Admiral Hale's composure finally broke. A single tear slipped down his face. He didn't wipe it away, because for the first time in half a year, his daughter was looking back, and beside her stood the quiet nurse, who had refused to let paperwork define reality. The hospital had declared Lily Hale dead, but someone trained in war had recognized the difference between silence and surrender, and the truth had begun to dismantle everything. Hospitals fear lawsuits. They fear malpractice claims. They fear budget cuts and bad press. But what they fear most is losing control of the narrative. By sunrise, St. Matthew's Medical Center had lost it. The first leak didn't come from the military. It came from a nurse on night shift who texted her sister. Brain dead patient responded. Admiral involved. NCIS here. By mid-morning, a local reporter had caught wind of federal agents investigating neurological error. By noon, satellite vans were parked discreetly across the street. Inside the hospital, administrators scrambled. Emergency board meeting. Crisis communications. Legal containment strategy. Helen Morris sat at the head of the long boardroom table, hands pressed flat against polished wood. "We must control messaging," she said sharply. "This is a diagnostic discrepancy under review." Across from her, a board member shook his head. "Federal agents froze our servers. Temporarily, and a Navy admiral's daughter was nearly removed from life support under falsified documentation." Silence followed, because that wasn't spin. That was fact. Downstairs, in Neuro ICU, Lily Hale opened her eyes again. This time, they stayed open. She couldn't move much. Her body was weak from months of inactivity. Muscles had atrophied. But her gaze was steady, focused, present. Dr. Klein stood near the foot of the bed, reviewing repeat scans. "There's brainstem compression," she explained to Admiral Hale. "Likely from swelling that stabilized but masked responsiveness." "Would that mimic brain death?" he asked. "In inexperienced hands, or in hands looking for confirmation?" The implication lingered. Admiral Hale nodded slowly. His daughter's fingers curled again, this time toward his uniform sleeve. He leaned close. "I'm here, Lily." Then, unexpectedly, toward Emma. Emma stood near the IV pump, adjusting flow rates. When she noticed Lily looking at her, she stepped closer. "You're back with us," she said softly. Lily's lips trembled. A whisper of sound escaped. Not a word yet, but an attempt. The Admiral's throat tightened. "You don't have to speak," he told her gently. "Just rest." Across the hallway, Captain Cole stood speaking quietly with Agent Rivera. "She was declared brain dead based on falsified confirmation," Rivera said, "and internal emails show discussion of ventilator allocation pressure." Cole's jaw tightened. So this wasn't a single rogue action. No, it was institutional convenience. Cole glanced through the glass at Emma. "She initiated this." Rivera nodded. "Her personnel file is unusual." "Unusual how?" "She enlisted as a medic at 19, assigned to Joint Special Operations Task Force. Multiple overseas deployments." Cole raised an eyebrow. "Decorations?" Rivera looked at the tablet again. "2 commendations for field resuscitation under fire." Cole let out a slow breath. "And now she's a rookie nurse in a civilian hospital. Discharged quietly. Medical retirement." Cole's gaze lingered on her. "She doesn't carry herself like a civilian." "No," Rivera agreed. "She carries herself like someone who's seen worse than this." Inside the ICU, the door opened. 2 hospital board members stepped in hesitantly. They looked uncomfortable in the sterile space. Admiral Hale didn't turn toward them. One cleared his throat. "Admiral Hale, we want to extend our deepest apologies." The Admiral's voice was calm. "You declared my daughter dead." "Yes, sir. And we are initiating a full review." "Review won't undo 6 months." The board member swallowed. "We are terminating Dr. Ramsey effective immediately." Emma didn't look up. Lily's eyes shifted slightly at the unfamiliar voices. Lower your voices, Emma said gently but firmly. The board members blinked. Instinctively, they obeyed. The Admiral noticed. He noticed the way authority shifted subtly around her. You were military, he said quietly when the board members stepped back out. Emma nodded once. Medical. Special operations? A pause. Yes. Lily's fingers twitched again. Emma leaned closer. Blink once for yes, she whispered softly. Twice for no. Lily blinked once. Clear. Controlled. Klein inhaled sharply. She has reliable command response. The Admiral closed his eyes briefly. 6 months. 6 months she had been aware, hearing conversations, feeling time pass. Trapped. Rage simmered beneath his composure. But when he opened his eyes again, he didn't look at the doctors. He looked at Emma. You pressed behind her ear. Yes, that wasn't random. No. Where did you learn it? In Afghanistan, she said quietly. Klein looked up. Field neurological stimulation? Emma nodded. When imaging wasn't available, Admiral Hale studied her carefully. How many times? There was no pride in her voice, just memory. The ICU door opened again. This time, it wasn't hospital staff. 2 men in civilian clothes entered. Broad shoulders, short haircuts, posture unmistakable. They paused when they saw Emma. One of them inhaled sharply. Navarro? Emma turned slowly. For the first time since this began, her composure shifted, just slightly. Chief, she said quietly. Admiral Hale looked between them. You know each other. The taller man nodded. She pulled 3 of my guys out under mortar fire. Emma's jaw tightened. That was a team effort. The other man shook his head. No, that was you. The room fell silent. Dr. Klein looked at her with new understanding. You were combat medical. Emma didn't answer directly. The taller man continued. We heard about this case, came as soon as we could. Admiral Hale stepped closer. You served under which command? Joint Task Force 7, sir. Recognition flashed across Hale's face. That unit doesn't take rookies. Emma's eyes returned to Lily. I wasn't a rookie then. Lily blinked again. Once. Deliberate. The chief stepped closer to the bed. She's tracking. That's strong. Emma nodded. She's fighting. The chief looked at Admiral Hale. You're lucky she's here. Hale studied Emma again. No bragging, no dramatic reveal, just quiet competence. Outside, reporters were beginning to gather in larger numbers. Inside, hospital leadership was in full crisis containment. Helen Morris stood before the board again. They've identified systemic negligence. One board member leaned forward. And the nurse? She appears to have military commendations. And we dismissed her as inexperienced. Morris closed her eyes briefly. Yes. Back in the ICU, Lily attempted another sound. Her lips formed something close to a word. Emma leaned close. Slow, she whispered. Don't rush. The Admiral froze. Then he leaned forward. I'm here. His voice broke openly now. I'm here. Lily's eyes filled with tears. The chief stepped back quietly, giving space. Doctor, Klein wiped discreet moisture from her own eye. Emma adjusted the ventilator settings slightly to reduce assistance. Lily initiated another breath on her own. The hospital had declared her gone. But she was not gone. And the nurse they had underestimated had just become the center of a storm they could not control. Admiral Hale turned slowly toward Emma. I need to know something, he said. She met his gaze calmly. Yes, sir. Why didn't you say who you were? Her answer was simple. Because it wasn't about me. Silence settled in the room again. Outside, justice had begun. And the rookie nurse was no longer invisible. By the 3rd day, the story was national. Admiral's daughter declared brain dead shows signs of awareness. Federal investigation into hospital misdiagnosis. Combat medic nurse challenges brain death ruling. The headlines varied in tone, but they all circled the same core truth. A hospital had been wrong, and a young nurse had caught it. Satellite vans lined the curb outside St. Matthew's. Security had been doubled. Hospital PR issued statements that sounded carefully sanded of responsibility. An internal review is ongoing. We are committed to patient safety. Procedural inconsistencies are being evaluated. Inside, the boardroom no longer felt powerful. It felt exposed. Dr. Victor Ramsey had formally resigned that morning, though the word resigned barely disguised the federal charges being prepared against him. Forgery, falsification of medical records, obstruction. Helen Morris sat rigid in her chair as outside counsel briefed the board. The sedation log alone undermines the brain death determination, the attorney said. And now that EEG reanalysis confirms cortical activity at the time of declaration, a board member interrupted quietly. We nearly killed a conscious patient. No, one contradicted him. Back in the neuro ICU, the atmosphere was different, quieter, focused, protective. Lily Hale's eyes were open more frequently now. Her movements were still limited. Fingers, subtle head shifts, controlled blinks, but awareness was no longer in question. She understood, and that understanding came with weight. Admiral Hale sat beside her, reading softly from a notebook he had brought from home. Letters from family, notes her mother had written before she passed years ago. Familiar stories. Lily's eyes filled with tears more than once. Dr. Klein adjusted medications to ease muscle rigidity while preserving clarity. She's likely experiencing emotional trauma, Klein explained gently. Locked-in awareness is isolating, terrifying. She heard everything? Possibly, Klein said carefully. Emma stood near the monitors, steady as ever. She had noticed something others hadn't yet. Lily's heart rate spiked whenever unfamiliar voices entered the room. Fear, hypervigilance, not confusion, trauma. Emma stepped closer one afternoon when Lily's breathing grew uneven. Slow, she murmured softly. Follow my voice. Lily's gaze locked onto her. Breathe in, a small inhale, out, exhale. Gradually, the monitor steadied. Admiral Hale noticed. You've done trauma recovery before. Emma nodded slightly, in different settings. That was all she offered. But the world outside was already digging. A national news outlet had obtained partial military records. The story shifted tone. Rookie nurse identified as decorated combat medic. Former Special Operations Field medic, now civilian nurse. A reporter stood outside the hospital gates describing her background with breathless intensity. Sources confirm Nurse Emma Navarro served multiple tours in classified operations. Inside, Emma walked the hallway without glancing at a single screen. She kept her head down, focused, unmoved. Captain Cole approached her near the ICU entrance. Your record's circulating, he said quietly. I expected that. You didn't list your commendations on your employment file. They weren't relevant. He studied her carefully. Most people would have used them. I'm not most people. Cole nodded slowly. You saved more than one life over there. I did my job, and you did it again here. She didn't respond. Inside Lily's room, two familiar figures arrived again. The same SEAL chief and his teammate from days before. They stood quietly at the foot of the bed. Lily's eyes shifted toward them. Recognition flickered. Hey, kid, the chief said softly. You gave us a scare. Emma stepped closer. Blink once if you remember him. Lily blinked once. The chief swallowed hard. She remembers. Admiral Hale turned to him. You served with Navarro. Yes, sir. Tell me. The chief hesitated, glancing briefly at Emma. She gave the slightest nod. Permission. She was our medic in Kandahar, he began. We were pinned down. IED blast took two of my men. One had no pulse. Everyone thought he was gone. He looked at Lily. She refused to stop compressions. Used field nerve stim. Got a response. Same look you had a few days ago. Lily's eyes shifted toward Emma. The chief continued. She saved 3 that night. Emma's expression remained neutral. The teammate added quietly. She stayed awake 30 hours straight. Admiral Hale's gaze softened. You never mentioned any of this. Emma adjusted Lily's IV line gently. It wasn't relevant. The chief let out a quiet breath. It's relevant. Lily attempted another whisper. This time it formed clearer. Thank. Emma leaned close. You don't owe me anything. But Lily's eyes insisted. Gratitude. Back in the boardroom, the hospital leadership was fracturing. Several board members had called for Morris's resignation. You suppressed concerns, one accused. I followed protocol, Morris replied defensively. Protocol doesn't excuse falsification. The attorney interrupted. Federal indictment is likely. The cost of convenience had become catastrophic. In the ICU, Lily's strength improved incrementally. Physical therapy was being consulted. Speech therapy scheduled. Dr. Klein briefed Admiral Hale carefully. She may regain significant function, she said, but the psychological impact will require patience. He nodded. We have time. He turned to Emma. You gave us that. She met his eyes briefly. She did. Lily blinked once in agreement. Outside, media narratives were shifting again. Now the story wasn't just about hospital negligence. It was about a nurse who refused to look away, a medic who recognized the difference between silence and surrender, a rookie who challenged authority. But inside the ICU, none of that mattered. What mattered was Lily lifting her fingers again, slower, steadier. What mattered was her breathing independently for 10 seconds longer than the day before. What mattered was her whispering one clear word that afternoon. Dad? Admiral Hale leaned close, tears falling freely now. I'm here. Lily's gaze shifted toward Emma again. This time, her fingers moved slowly upward. A shaky, imperfect motion. A salute. Not crisp, not strong, but unmistakable. The chief stiffened instinctively. Admiral Hale inhaled sharply. Emma stepped forward, and instead of returning the salute formally, she gently adjusted the blanket around Lily's shoulders. You focus on getting stronger, she said softly. The salute wasn't about rank. It was about recognition, and Lily recognized her. Outside, the hospital's reputation crumbled. Federal charges were filed. Dr. Ramsey was formally indicted. Helen Morris submitted her resignation. The board issued a public apology, but in room 427 of Neuro ICU, the only thing that mattered was a young woman reclaiming her life, and a quiet nurse who never once made it about herself. Recovery is rarely cinematic. It is slow. By the end of the first week, Lily Hale could breathe on her own for extended intervals. The ventilator had been downgraded to support mode. Her fingers moved with increasing coordination. Her eyes tracked consistently, but the most difficult part of her awakening wasn't physical. It was memory. Dr. Klein had warned Admiral Hale gently. Locked-in awareness often means partial auditory processing. She may have heard more than we'd like. Hale had nodded at the time. He hadn't fully understood what that meant until Lily asked the question. It came in fragments. Speech therapy had begun that morning. Her voice was raspy, unused for months. Each word took effort. Emma stood quietly near the window as Lily struggled through syllables. I heard. Admiral Hale leaned closer. You heard what, sweetheart? Lily's eyes filled. They said, gone. The room went silent. Hale's grip on the chair tightened. You mean the doctors? A slow blink. Yes, tears spilled from the corners of her eyes. They said unplug. The Admiral closed his eyes. His jaw tightened with a force that felt almost physical. Emma stepped closer without speaking. She adjusted Lily's pillow slightly, grounding her body gently. You're safe now, Emma said softly. Focus on now. Lily's breathing quickened. I tried move, scream, Her voice cracked. Hale's composure fractured. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know." She blinked hard. "I know." Those two words nearly broke him. Dr. Klein stepped in gently. "Trauma processing will take time," she said. "The body protects itself. So does the mind." But the hospital walls could not protect themselves from what was coming. 3 days later, Admiral Hale stood behind a podium outside St. Matthew's Medical Center. Cameras flashed. Microphones angled upward. His uniform was immaculate again. But this was not ceremony. This was accountability. "My daughter was declared brain dead," he began steadily. "She was not," the crowd stilled. "For 6 months we were told there was nothing left. That hope was irrational. That medicine had spoken." His voice did not rise. It sharpened. A nurse challenged that conclusion. Reporters leaned forward. She noticed what others dismissed. She insisted on reassessment. "And because of her, my daughter is alive." A reporter called out, "Is it true she's a former special operations medic?" Hale paused. "That is not my story to tell." Another voice, "Do you believe the hospital acted maliciously?" Hale's eyes hardened slightly. "I believe systems sometimes value efficiency over humility." He stepped back from the podium. No anger, no theatrics, just truth. Inside the hospital, the board meeting that afternoon was tense. 2 members had already resigned under pressure. Federal investigations were ongoing, insurance carriers were reconsidering contracts, and then came the most ironic decision of all. Helen Morris, now interim consultant during transition, spoke carefully. "Given the national attention, we must consider operational risk. Nurse Navarro has become central to the narrative." A board member frowned. "She saved a patient." "Yes," Morris said, "but her continued presence invites scrutiny." Silence followed. "You're suggesting we remove her?" someone asked. "Temporarily," Morris corrected. The logic was cold. Protect the institution. Again. Word reached Captain Cole within hours. He walked directly into the executive wing. "You are not terminating her," he said evenly. Morris folded her hands. She violated protocol. Cole's expression didn't change. She saved a life. She overstepped medical authority. She identified falsified documentation. Morris hesitated. "You don't understand hospital liability." Cole leaned forward slightly. Later that evening, Emma was called into a small administrative office. 2 HR representatives sat across from her. "This is a precautionary leave," one began. Emma listened without interruption. "You'll receive full pay pending review." She nodded once. Understood. No protest, no argument. She stood and left quietly. Outside, Captain Cole waited in the hallway. "They're putting you on leave." "Yes, sir." He studied her. "You're not fighting it." He exhaled slowly. "It should be." She shook her head. "Lily is stable. That's what matters." Inside the ICU, Lily noticed the change immediately. "Emma?" Hale hesitated. "She's on leave." Lily's eyes widened slightly. "Why?" Hale's jaw tightened. "Politics." Lily's breathing grew uneven. Ema entered quietly a few minutes later to gather her belongings from the locker near the nurses' station. Before she could leave, the SEAL chief intercepted her. "You're walking?" "Temporary leave." He shook his head. "They're trying to erase you." "I'm not that easy to erase." He smirked slightly. "Good." The full reveal. The next morning, national news aired a segment featuring 2 decorated SEAL officers. They stood in front of a plain backdrop. No dramatic music. One spoke calmly. Nurse Emma Navarro served 3 tours embedded with special operations teams. The second added, she performed neurological field resuscitation under combat conditions. Multiple lives saved. Archival footage flashed briefly, blurred, distant, but enough to show context. She left service quietly after sustaining injury. The first continued. She never sought recognition. Back inside St. Matthew's, The board watched the segment in silence. One member finally spoke. "We tried to suspend her?" No one answered, because the mistake was obvious now. You don't sideline someone who has already stood in worse rooms under heavier fire. Back in Neuro ICU, Lily asked for something unexpected. "Call. Her." Hale nodded. Within the hour, Emma returned. Not in uniform, not in scrubs, just simple civilian clothes. She stepped into the room quietly. Lily's eyes lit with recognition. "You? Leaving?" Emma replied gently. Lily swallowed carefully. "Don't!" The word carried more strength than her muscles. Hale stepped back slightly, giving them space. Emma moved closer. "I go where I'm needed. You're needed here." Silence settled between them. Not dramatic, not loud, just clear. For the first time since this began, the power dynamic had fully reversed. The hospital had tried to dismiss her. The nation now knew her name, but she remained unchanged, still quiet, still steady, still focused on the patient in front of her, because heroism to her had never required a spotlight. Outside, federal charges were formally announced. Dr. Ramsey would face prosecution. Helen Morris resigned completely. The hospital board issued a second public apology, this time naming Emma Navarro directly. Inside the ICU, Lily reached slowly for Emma's hand again, a stronger grip this time. Intentional. Alive. And for the first time since the beginning, the system that had tried to silence truth was the one answering questions. Justice does not move quickly. It moves deliberately. Paperwork replaces ventilators. Courtrooms replace ICU bays. Words are dissected as carefully as neurological scans. 3 weeks after Lily Hale's awakening, Dr. Victor Ramsey sat in a federal courtroom. The same man who once stood confidently beside a hospital bed now faced indictment under fluorescent lights that felt harsher than any ICU lamp. Charges were read clearly: falsification of medical records, fraudulent documentation of death confirmation, obstruction of federal investigation. He did not look like a villain. He looked tired. But fatigue does not erase consequence. In the gallery sat Admiral Hale, not in dress whites this time, civilian suit, hands folded calmly. Beside him sat Captain Cole. Behind them, 2 SEALs who had flown in voluntarily. They were not there for spectacle. They were there because accountability matters to men who understand chain of command. Ramsey's attorney argued systemic pressure. Hospital resource constraints, he said, administrative expectations, an environment that encouraged premature determinations. The prosecutor's voice was measured. Pressure does not authorize forgery. He held up the sedation log. "You altered confirmatory testing." Ramsey stared forward. For the first time, he did not argue. Across town, inside a rehabilitation suite converted from Neuro ICU, Lily Hale stood for the first time. 2 therapists supported her under each arm. Her legs trembled violently. Muscles unaccustomed to gravity shook under the effort. Admiral Hale stood directly in front of her. "You've got this," he said quietly. Emma stood near the doorway, not intruding, observing, always observing. "Shift weight left," the therapist instructed. Lily's jaw clenched. She shifted. Her knee buckled slightly. Emma stepped forward instinctively, steadying her at the elbow. "Slow," she murmured. "You're not racing anyone." Lily's breathing evened out. She tried again. This time, 1 step. Small, unsteady, but hers. Admiral Hale exhaled a breath he didn't realize he was holding. The therapists exchanged quiet nods. "Again tomorrow," one said. Lily nodded weakly. Her gaze shifted toward Emma. "You?" "Stayed." Emma offered the smallest smile. "I said I would." The commendation, later that week, Captain Cole approached Emma in the hospital courtyard. The media presence had thinned, but whispers still lingered in corners. "The Department of Defense wants to issue a formal commendation," he said. Emma looked at him calmly. "For what?" "For saving the life of a military dependent under institutional negligence." She exhaled softly. I didn't do it for that. I know. He studied her carefully. They want it public. Emma's expression didn't change. No. Cole blinked. It would strengthen the case for medical reform. It would turn Lily into a headline again. He considered that. And you? I don't need a ceremony. Cole nodded slowly. You're consistent, Navarro. She didn't respond, because consistency had kept people alive before. Hospital reckoning. St. Matthew's Medical Center was no longer intact. 3 board members had resigned. 2 senior administrators were under investigation. A federal compliance monitor had been assigned. Internal memos were no longer private. Transparency replaced quiet corridors. Staff meetings shifted tone. Young nurses who had once dismissed Emma as overly serious now spoke differently. One approached her near the locker room. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For what? Emma looked at her evenly. You don't owe me. I owe the next patient. Emma nodded once. Then pay it forward. Lily speaks. It took effort. Speech therapy sessions were exhausting. But one afternoon, Lily asked for something specific. I want record. Admiral Hale frowned slightly. Record what? She swallowed carefully. What I heard. The room grew still. Dr. Klein hesitated. That may be difficult. I know. Emma stepped forward gently. Only if you're ready. A small recorder was placed on the bedside table. Her voice was still fragile, but steady. I heard them say, nothing left. I heard, unplug. I tried move. Couldn't. Her father closed his eyes briefly. They said, comfort care. Tears slid down her cheeks. I wasn't gone. Emma rested a steady hand on her shoulder. No, you weren't. The recording would later become part of federal review, not as vengeance, but as evidence. Evidence of what silence can hide. 2 weeks later, Admiral Hale requested a private meeting with Emma. They met in a quiet hospital conference room, far from cameras and corridors. I've been asked to consult on military medical oversight, he said. Emma listened. They want reform in brain death protocols, especially for dependents. She nodded slightly. I recommended you. Silence. For what role? Field assessment, integration, oversight. Emma's eyes remained steady. That's political. It's necessary. She considered it. You'd be stepping into policy, Hale continued. Not just practice. Emma looked down briefly at her hands. Hands that had applied pressure behind an ear and changed everything. I work best in rooms, she said quietly. Not behind podiums. Hale studied her carefully. You changed a system. I corrected a mistake. He shook his head slightly. You forced humility into a place that forgot it, because humility had never been her goal. Survival had. The walk, Lily took 5 steps without support by the end of the month. Slow. Measured. Each one a quiet victory. Emma walked beside her during sessions, not touching unless necessary. You're not hovering, Lily observed one afternoon. You don't need hovering. Yes. Lily smiled faintly. Good. The court's decision, Ramsey accepted a plea agreement. Loss of license, federal probation, restitution. No prison sentence, but permanent professional exile. In his final statement, he said only one thing that mattered. I was wrong. It did not undo 6 months, but it marked the line, the choice. On a quiet evening, Emma stood alone in the now empty room 312, the room where Lily had once lain motionless under fluorescent light. She ran her fingers briefly along the wall near where the monitor had been. The hospital offered her a permanent supervisory position. The military offered her reform consultation. The media still requested interviews. Her phone buzzed. A message from Admiral Hale. The hearing room did not feel like a hospital. It felt like a reckoning. Rows of officials sat behind polished desks beneath a state seal. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters filled every available seat. The air carried that particular tension that exists when institutions know they are about to be questioned under oath. A special federal medical oversight panel had convened to examine procedural failures in brain death determinations across civilian hospitals receiving military funding. At the center of it all was one case: Lily Hale. Admiral Hale sat in the front row, posture upright but no longer rigid. Lily sat beside him in a wheelchair, a light blanket over her legs. She insisted on attending in person. Her movements were still deliberate, her speech still measured, but her eyes were steady, present. When her name was called, the room quieted. She wheeled forward slowly, assisted only lightly by a therapist. The panel chair leaned toward the microphone. "Miss Hale, you may proceed when ready." Lily took a breath. It was fully her own now. "I was declared brain dead," she began, her voice soft but clear. "I was not." The room stilled further. "I heard doctors say there was nothing left. I heard them tell my father to let me go." A visible ripple passed through the audience. I tried to move. I tried to scream. I couldn't. Admiral Hale's jaw tightened. But he did not interrupt. Lily continued. "I don't want revenge. I want change." Silence followed. The panel chair nodded respectfully. "You believe procedural reform is necessary?" "Yes," she said simply. "No one should be declared gone because it's convenient." Across the room, former administrators from St. Matthew's sat quietly, no longer in power suits, no longer shielded by authority. Now, they were witnesses. After Lily finished, she wheeled back beside her father. Then another name was called: Nurse Emma Navarro. A murmur moved through the audience. Emma stepped forward calmly. She wore no uniform, no military insignia, no decorations, just a simple blazer. The panel chair adjusted his glasses. "Nurse Navarro, you challenged the initial diagnosis. I requested reassessment. What prompted you?" Emma paused briefly. "Inconsistency. Explain." The patient's heart rate variability did not match a non-responsive neurological profile. There were microfluctuations inconsistent with complete brainstem cessation. The chair nodded. "You applied a field technique." "Yes." "Where did you learn it?" "In military service." A panel member leaned forward. "Were you trained to question senior authority?" Emma's expression did not change. "I was trained to preserve life." Silence again. "Did you believe hospital protocol was compromised?" "Yes." "Did you fear retaliation?" "No." "Why not?" She considered the question. "Because if I was wrong, I would accept consequence." If I was right, silence would have been worse. The statement settled heavily. The chair leaned back slightly. "Do you believe systemic reform is required?" "Yes." "What reform?" "Mandatory independent review for brain death declarations involving extended sedation history. Separation between resource allocation committees and diagnostic authority. And training in field neurological assessment for atypical cases." Her voice remained calm, clinical, precise, no emotion. But the room understood the weight. Later that afternoon, Admiral Hale addressed the panel. "As a commander, I have signed casualty notifications," he said. "The difference between certainty and assumption matters. Medicine must operate with humility equal to its authority." Applause was prohibited, but respect filled the room. Outside, reporters summarized the testimony. The narrative had evolved. It was no longer just about one hospital. It was about oversight, reform, humility. Back inside the hospital, the staff watched the hearing live stream in break rooms. Younger nurses leaned closer, one whispered. "She's not even angry." Another replied, "She doesn't need to be." Because anger wasn't what dismantled arrogance. Truth did. The confrontation. A week later, Lily requested something unexpected. "I want to see them." Her father hesitated. "Are you sure?" Arrangements were made. In a quiet hospital conference room, Lily sat facing Helen Morris and two former board members. No cameras, no press. Just presence. Morris spoke first. "I am deeply sorry." Lily held her gaze. Why did it happen? Morris swallowed. Pressure, metrics, fear of litigation, a belief that prognosis was irreversible. You didn't double check. We trusted documentation. Lily's voice sharpened slightly. You trusted paperwork more than me. No one responded. Lily looked down briefly at her hands, hands that once could not move. Don't let it happen again, she said quietly. Morris nodded. It won't. But this time, the promise felt different, because now there were federal monitors and public awareness and policy reform underway. After the hearing, the Department of Defense formally proposed a medical advisory role for EMA. It included travel, policy drafting, national protocol updates. She sat in a quiet courtyard with Admiral Hale reviewing the proposal. You could change more lives, he said. She stared at the paper. I didn't join medicine for committees. You joined to preserve life. Yes, this preserves life. She considered that, but something inside her remained grounded elsewhere, in rooms, at bedsides, where pulse meets hand. I'll consult, she said finally. Limited capacity. Hale nodded slowly. That's enough. Back in the neuro rehab unit, Lily walked 20 steps with a cane. Each one deliberate. Emma walked beside her, not hovering. You're still here, Lily observed. For now. Will you leave, eventually? Lily nodded thoughtfully. You'll be needed somewhere else. Emma allowed herself a faint smile. Probably. Lily stopped walking briefly. You saved me. Emma shook her head gently. You stayed. The difference mattered. The quiet after St. Matthew's Medical Center underwent structural reform. New compliance officers, independent review panels. Brain death determinations required dual external validation. The hospital's reputation slowly stabilized, not because the story disappeared, but because it was confronted. Dr. Klein was promoted to lead neurological oversight. Young residents trained differently now. They asked more questions. They looked longer at monitors. And in the ICU, a small plaque was installed quietly near the nurse's station. Let humility guide diagnosis. No names attached. No hero inscription. Just a reminder, Emma stood once more outside room 312. It was occupied now by a different patient, different family, different story. She watched the monitors briefly, then stepped inside. Because reform begins in courtrooms, but it lives in rooms. And somewhere down the hall, Lily Hale walked again. Alive. Present. Proof. Recovery changed the rhythm of everything. The ICU had once pulsed with mechanical urgency. Alarms, ventilators, rapid orders. Now the neurorehabilitation floor moved differently. Slower. Intentional. Measured in inches rather than crises. Lily Hale stood beside parallel bars, her hands gripping them tightly. Her legs trembled as she shifted her weight forward. One more, the therapist encouraged. She stepped, not gracefully, not steadily, but forward. Admiral Hale stood a few feet away, no longer afraid to breathe when she moved. Across the room, Emma leaned against the wall, arms folded loosely. She wasn't assisting today. Lily had insisted. I can do it, she had said earlier, voice still hoarse, but firmer each day. Emma believed her. Lily reached the end of the bars and turned slowly. When her eyes found Emma, there was something new in them, not just gratitude. Strength. A private conversation. That evening, Admiral Hale asked Emma to meet him on the hospital rooftop garden. The sun was lowering, casting long shadows over the city skyline. For once, there were no cameras, no agents, no administrators, just a father and the nurse who had refused to give up on his daughter. You're leaving, he said quietly. Emma didn't deny it. My contract here ends next month. And the advisory role? I agreed to consult temporarily. He nodded. But you won't stay. She looked out over the skyline. I work best where I'm needed most. And once systems stabilize, I move on. Hale studied her. You've done that before. Yes. In combat. Yes. He inhaled slowly. Why? She took a moment before answering. Because when people depend on certainty, they stop looking closely. I don't. He understood that. As a commander, he had learned the same lesson. Lily asked about you this afternoon, he said. Emma's eyes shifted slightly. She asked if you ever sleep. A faint smile touched her face. Sometimes. She asked why you never talk about what you've done. Emma's expression softened. Because what's done doesn't matter. What's next does. Hale nodded slowly. I owe you. She shook her head gently. You don't. I do. You trusted me. He held her gaze. That was instinct, and instinct kept her alive, she replied. They stood in silence for a moment, the city lights flickering on one by one. You changed more than her outcome, he said finally. You changed how people look at authority. Emma didn't answer, because she hadn't set out to change authority, only to question it. Inside her room later that night, Lily sat upright without assistance. She held a small notebook in her lap. When Emma entered quietly, Lily didn't look surprised. I knew you'd come, she said. You're awake. I can't sleep. Emma stepped closer. Pain? No. Lily tapped the notebook. I wrote something. Emma waited. I don't want to be the girl who was almost unplugged. You're not. I want to do something. With what? With the fact that I heard them. Emma sat in the chair beside her. That's yours to decide. Lily looked at her carefully. You never wanted attention. No. Why? Because attention doesn't heal people. Lily considered that, but stories can. Silence stretched between them. Emma didn't dismiss the idea. Then tell it your way, she said. Lily nodded slowly. I will. National reform. 2 weeks later, the Federal Oversight Panel released formal recommendations: mandatory independent neurological confirmation in extended coma cases, separation of financial review boards from diagnostic authority, enhanced documentation transparency with automatic audit triggers for sedation inconsistencies, and a new training module integrated into national medical education. Field neurological assessment in atypical presentations. Emma's name appeared once in the official release. Not in bold, not in headlines, simply acknowledged. Consultation provided by Nurse Emma Navarro, former military field medic. That was enough. Captain Cole called her that evening. You did it. I consulted. You shifted national policy. Good. He laughed softly. You really don't care about recognition. It doesn't change the work. The farewell, the day Emma officially cleared her locker at St. Matthew's, the hallway felt different. Not heavy, not chaotic, just aware. Several nurses gathered quietly near the station. No ceremony, no banner, just presence. Dr. Klein approached first. You made me a better neurologist, she said simply. Emma nodded. You were already good. Not like this. Klein extended her hand. Emma shook it. The SEAL chief appeared next, hands in his pockets. Try not to disappear, he said. I never do. He smirked. Yeah, you kind of don't. Admiral Hale arrived last, not in uniform. Just a father. He extended his hand. Emma looked at it, then shook it. Firm. Respectful. Where will you go? He asked. There's a rural hospital that requested emergency coverage, she said. Of course there is. She adjusted the strap of her small duffel bag. Tell Lily I expect 20 steps next week. She'll do 30. A brief silence passed. You'll always have a place on my ship, he said quietly. She met his eyes. I know. Then she walked down the hallway. No applause. No cameras, just steady steps. 3 months later, Lily Hale walked into a rehabilitation auditorium, unaided. A cane rested loosely in her hand, but she barely leaned on it. She approached the small stage where a medical ethics forum was underway. When her turn came to speak, she didn't recount every painful detail. She didn't dramatize. She said only this: authority must never become louder than observation. In the back of the room, unnoticed, Ema stood quietly near the exit, listening, then leaving before anyone could turn and thank her again, because humility does not stay for applause. It moves to the next room, the next patient, the next quiet moment where someone almost gives up. And somewhere far from headlines and hearings, in a small rural emergency department lit by flickering fluorescent lights, a nurse stepped forward when others hesitated. Calm, steady, unassuming. Her name didn't matter. Her past didn't need repeating. What mattered was this: she looked closely, she asked questions, and she refused to let silence be mistaken for surrender.